Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we are going to learn how to work with the data that we fetched in the last video. So as we saw, this useQuery hook, along with our collections GQL query, was able to return back to us the data of collections. What we want to do now is we want to convert it from the array of collections over to this map of collections that we're so used to using. So in order for us to utilize this, what we'll do is we'll transform the data. And to transform the data, we'll run an effect. As you can imagine, the data that we get back from this hook is something that we can pass into our useEffects dependency array, so that we only run this effect whenever the data updates. So we know that whenever we get this data, we want to essentially reduce over it and generate the map as we've been doing up to this point. What we want to do though is we want to make sure that that data exists first, because as we saw on initialization, that data comes in undefined when we're initially fetching for that data. So here we'll say if the data exists, then what we'll do is we will fetch the collections value off of the data. Next, what we're going to do is we need to generate this collections map. So this is equal to the same code we had before, where we reduced over it, and we start with an object. As we reduce over it, what we're going to do is in the callback, we know that we're getting this accumulator value as well as the collection itself. So we'll say, first, let's pull off the title and the items from the collection. And then we'll add that title as the key onto the accumulator, and we'll make sure that we lowercase it as well. And this value will be set to the items array. And then we just need to return the accumulator so that it continues on through the rest of the reduce. Once we're done, then we are going to set the categories map equal to our collections map. So we'll run set categories map equal to collections map. And that's it. That's all we need. We can now get rid of our console log. And now categories map is already passed as a value into our context. But we can also add in the loading state, like so. And now we have all of our values. If we go back to our application, what we'll see is that if we enter the shop, our data is present. If we go into a category, the data is still there. So everything works. We have everything hooked up. But one thing that we might want to do is that on refresh, notice that we don't have the spinner because we had that when we implemented our Redux Saga as well as our Redux Thunk pattern. But due to the fact that loading is present now, we can always leverage this inside of our appropriate application. So here I'm going to go into the category component. Actually, let's go into the shop component. So in the shop component, we know that we have categories preview and category. In the categories preview is where we draw the categories map. So in order for us to modify this to use the spinner and the loading value, we're already passing that loading value through the actual context. So we can just get that directly here now. Next, what we're going to do is we want to import in the spinner component. So let's import spinner from our components folder, our spinner folder, spinner component. And now all we need to do is conditionally render. So we will say, if it's loading, then render the spinner component. Otherwise, render in our object keys map code that we had up until this point. So now if we save this and we go back to our application and we do a hard refresh, there we see our spinner and then our code loads in. Awesome. So let's do the same thing for our other component, which is our category component. So opening up this component, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to bring in the loading value, and we're also going to import in our spinner. Going up to our components folder, into our spinner folder, grabbing our spinner component. So just like we did before, here what we're going to do is we are going to wrap this fragment inside of a conditional check. So we'll say that if loading is true, then load the spinner. Otherwise, render out this title and this category container. But because this needs a top-level parent, we'll also wrap this inside of a fragment. And I'm sure that some of my spacing is off, or my brackets, like so. And there we go. So let's save this and let's go back into our category preview. And if we refresh, we see where our spinner, and then we see our content. Awesome. So everything here is working. So we've learned how to use that exact same collections query that we had in our GraphQL in order to fetch all of the appropriate items. In the next video, let's actually leverage a different query and query by a variable. And I'll show you how that works. I'll see you in the next video.